You've seen the movies. Maybe you've also even read the book. But do you really understand what's going on with the monster from It? If you think it's just a clown, you don't know the half of it, so we'll give you the full rundown before Welcome to Derry drops. If we're going to start at the very beginning of the It monster story, we're going to have to go way back, like way back, to a time before the existence of the universe as we know it. It's almost hard to fathom, but bear with us. It all makes sense, in a Stephen King sort of way at least. So there's an endless void called the Macroverse, and it's inhabited by an all-powerful being referred to as the Other. For reasons unknown, it eventually creates two other cosmic beings. One is a giant turtle known as Maturin. Yeah, we know. It's a weird image. A big turtle just floating out there in the nothingness. Just go with it, friends. The other creature is a shape-shifting entity known as the Deadlights, which has the power to blind and permanently incapacitate anyone who stares at its true form. Its favorite way to appear, on Earth anyway, is as Pennywise the Dancing Clown, or if you can fight your way past that form, a giant spider. But all that comes much later. At first, it's just these two beings chilling out there in the Macroverse. Maturin is wise and kind, and prefers to just stay in his shell. As a result, the Deadlights thinks of its turtle brother as lazy and stupid. Eventually, Maturin does come out of his shell, but not to win over his bro. He's actually sick and just barfs up an entire universe, the one we call home today. As disgusting as that may be, the Deadlights sees this as an opportunity to go off in search of sustenance, which, as we all know, isn't exactly food.
Tasty, tasty, beautiful fear.
Yep, it feeds on the awful feelings created by none other than human imaginations, especially those of children, which are quite a bit more active and unrestrained than those of adults.
You all taste so much better when you're afraid.
And that's why it decides to crash land on Earth like a meteor and hibernate until there are some quality imaginations to feast on. The area it lands in, of course, is where the town of Derry ends up being built, and it's not until the early 1700s that the cosmic monster awakens and carries through with its first official reign of terror. Quick disclaimer before we talk about that. The timeline in the book varies somewhat from the timeline that's touched on in the movies or the miniseries, and we're willing to bet that it continues to vary in Welcome to Derry. So we're just going to stick with the timeline discussed in the book, at least for all this stuff that takes place hundreds of years ago. Not only is it a bit more fleshed out, it's also pretty similar to what's mentioned in the movies anyway. Okay, back to it. The first time the entity we call It appears is sometime around 1740. For 3 years, it feasts on the settlers of Derry Township, and by the time it's through, more than 300 people have gone missing. In the book, it's compared to the real-life unsolved mystery regarding the disappearance of colonists on Roanoke Island in North Carolina in 1590. After it's finished with its rampage, it goes into hibernation. It's not until sometime around 1850 or 1851 that the monster wakes up and decides to have its way with a group of lumberjacks who are spending the winter somewhere around the upper Kentucky stream. Their bodies are discovered by another group of lumberjacks who happen upon them later on. It's described in the book via the first interlude, which consists of some of Mike's unpublished notes for his book, Derry, An Unauthorized Town History. It reads as such. There were 9 of them in all 9 hacked to pieces. Heads had rolled, not to mention arms, a foot or two, and a man's been nailed to one wall of the cabin. It's impossible to know exactly what went down and how the monster drove the lumberjacks to madness, but yeah, pretty gnarly for sure. That same year, 1851, another massacre occurs. This time, it involves a man named John Markson and his entire family. After murdering every last one of them with poison and arranging them in a circle, he himself eats an extremely poisonous white nightshade mushroom, a fictitious fungi as far as we can tell. His death is described in the first interlude, the same as the murder of the lumberjacks. The section reads, "His death agonies must have been intense. The town constable who found him wrote in his report that at first he believed the corpse was grinning at him. He wrote of Markson's awful white smile. The white smile was an entire mouthful of the killer mushroom. Markson had gone on eating even as the cramps and the excruciating muscle spasms must have been racking his dying body." Again, it's left to our imaginations how exactly this all goes down. But knowing what we know about this monster, the physical agony of death is likely only half the battle for Markson. It's not until 1905 that another incident comes to pass. It's described in great detail in the fourth interlude, which, like the other interludes, consists of Mike's unpublished notes. He relates the story of a loner by the name of Claude Heroux as told by a man named Egbert Thorogood. Thorogood was only 18 years old at the time of the incident, but Mike trusts his account over all others. The SparkNotes version of the story goes like this. Heroux becomes involved with a group of 3 other men who are trying to unionize the lumber business. After everyone but Heroux is murdered, he starts getting weird. Everything culminates on a rainy September night when Heroux walks into the sleepy Silver Dollar bar, which is filled with loggers, including Thorogood. Heroux takes an axe and slaughters a number of them before giving himself up. After being brought to jail, a mob of townspeople show up to pull him out into the street and hang him. When Mike asks Thorogood if he saw anyone he didn't recognize during this saga, the old man replies, "There was a fella in there, comical sort of fella, doing flips and rollovers, juggling glasses, tricks. Put 4 dimes on his forehead and they'd stay right there. Comical, you know?" Yeah, definitely sounds like someone or something we know, huh? Only a year or so later, in 1906, an even greater tragedy occurs. For Easter Sunday, the owners of the Kitchener Ironworks plant organize an elaborate Easter egg hunt for the kids of Derry. There are 500 eggs in total hidden throughout the building. At 3:15 in the afternoon, the plant explodes. In the end, 102 people are killed, 88 of them children. The last victim found is described as such. On the following Wednesday, while the city still lay in stunned, silent contemplation of the tragedy, a woman found the head of 9-year-old Robert Dohe caught in the limbs of her backyard apple tree. There was chocolate on the Dohe lad's teeth and blood in his hair. He was the last of the known dead. The explosion is never explained. Every last boiler in the building had been shut down before the hunt began, so it really only leaves one explanation. After this, the monster goes back into hibernation until 1929, which is when an incident involving the townspeople of Derry and the Bradley gang comes to pass. The story is related in the third interlude via an interview Mike conducts with Norbert Keene, the longtime proprietor of the Center Street drugstore. After robbing a bunch of banks and killing a banker, the Bradley gang head up northeast and choose Derry as their place to lay low in for a while. It doesn't take them long to get bored, so they decide to buy a bunch of ammo and go hunting. Lal, the owner of the store they attempt to buy ammo from, recognizes them and tells them he'll have to call in an order to satisfy their demand. After the gang agrees to come back in 2 days, Lal tells everyone in town about it, which prompts many of them to buy ammo themselves and organize an ambush. When the gang returns, the townspeople blast them all to smithereens. Afterwards, everyone, even the town police chief, pretends it never happened. When Mike asks Keene if he remembers seeing anyone he didn't recognize that day, the old drugstore owner says, "The clown, you mean? How did you find out about him, Sonny?" He then goes on to describe the old it monster in detail, saying, "He wasn't wearing a clown suit or nothing like that. He was dressed in a pair of farmer's bib-alls and a cotton shirt underneath. But his face was covered with that white grease paint they use, and he had a big red clown smile painted on. Also had these tufts of fake hair, you know, orange, sorta comical." Not only was the monster there when it happened, but it even participated in the shootout itself. A year later, in 1930, another catastrophic event goes down, a massive fire at the Black Spot. The story of this incident is related by Mike in the second interlude, which is actually a story told to him by his father, William, on his deathbed. Back in 1930, Mike's father is a soldier in the Derry Army Air Corps, and he, along with the other black soldiers in his company, deal with pretty much every brand of racism that defines that time period. One of many examples of this is they aren't allowed to drink in any of the usual bars or clubs that the other soldiers typically drink in. So, they convert an old shack on the edge of town into their own bar, the Black Spot. After a while, the club becomes a popular place, even among some of the folks who wouldn't let them drink at the other Derry bars. Well, this doesn't go over well with Maine Legion of White Decency, which is basically the book's northern equivalent of the Ku Klux Klan, and they show up to burn the place to the ground. They succeed, and it's a terrifying ordeal. William finishes the tale by describing a strange sight he remembers to Mike. He says, "'Twas a bird, right over the last of those runnin' men. A hawk maybe, what they call a kestrel. But it was big, never told no one, would have been locked up. That bird was maybe 60 feet from wingtip to wingtip. It was the size of a Japanese zero. but I seen its eyes, and I think it's seen me. But that's not all. He goes on to say, it didn't hover. It floated. It floated. There were big bunches of balloons tied to each wing, and it floated. Yep, this was the monster's final feast before once again disappearing for another cycle. And this is when we transition into the events that concern the main characters of the story. In the book, this begins in 1957. In the miniseries, it begins in 1960. In the newest movies, it begins in 1988. We're just going to discuss the latest adaptation from here on out because, 1, it's linear and what the majority of people are familiar with these days, and 2, the book gets pretty, difficult to stomach at certain points. If you feel the urge to read about unfortunate depictions of preteen group sex and whatnot though, feel free to go crack that tome open. We won't stop you. Anyway, the monster makes its auspicious return to the fold by preying on a little boy named Georgie, who's just trying to have some fun in the rain with a paper boat that his older brother Bill made for him.
What a nice boat. Do you want it back?
It bites his arm off before dragging him into the sewer. No one sees this happen, of course, so the adults in the town are convinced he was merely swept away by the rain. The monster doesn't stop with Georgie. Just like it's done many times before over the last couple of centuries, it begins to feed on the people of Derry, mostly kids. The first one it takes after Georgie is a girl named Betty Ripsum. Then it takes one of the town bullies, Patrick Hockstetter. After that, it starts to focus its attention on a specific group of kids known as the Losers Club, the unofficial leader of them being Bill, Georgie's older brother. As we all know, it appears in numerous different forms in addition to Pennywise the Dancing Clown, all of them based on what each specific kid fears the most. For Mike, it appears as people, including his parents, who were burned alive in a fire. For Stanley, it appears as a demented flute-playing lady from a creepy painting that hangs in the office of his synagogue. For Ben, it appears as a headless corpse. Remember when we mentioned how they found the head of a child in an apple tree after the Kitchener Ironworks explosion? Yeah, it's old Robert Dohe. For Eddie, it appears as a leper, since he's an extreme germaphobe. For Beverly, it appears as a bunch of sentient hair that emerges from the drain of her bathroom sink. For Bill, it appears as Georgie.
You'll float too, you'll float too, you'll float too, you'll float too, you'll float too.
For Richie, it just reverts to its Pennywise visage since he's deathly afraid of clowns. But seriously though, who isn't? As Pennywise, it has a pretty good time trolling the kids for a while. It pops out of a projector screen in Bill's garage. It plays all sorts of tricks on them in an abandoned house. It even influences Derry's alpha bully, Henry Bowers, to kill his own father before going after the Losers Club. But none of its efforts are enough to stop them from standing up to it and temporarily putting an end to its reign of terror. After stealing Beverly and bringing her down into the Barrens, where it's been, stocking up on kids, the rest of the Losers Club ventured down there to save her. Turns out, the key to stopping the monster is pretty simple in theory. Just don't be afraid. Once they figure that out, they don't have much of an issue beating it into submission.
Now you're the one who's afraid. Because you're gonna starve.
With that, they send it into the depths, where it remains in hibernation yet again for another 27 years. Flash forward to 2016. The members of the Losers Club are well into adulthood when the monster re-emerges. Its first order of business is to murder a man named Adrian after he and his boyfriend are beaten up by a gang of homophobes. After that, it kills a little girl named Victoria at a baseball game before helping Henry Bowers make his escape from the mental institution he's been locked up in since he killed his father back in the day. Its deeds prompt Mike, the only member of the Losers Club who remained in Derry, to call everyone back home to fulfill the oath they all made back in 1989 to face off against the monster if it were to ever return.
We made an oath. That's why I brought you back. That's why you're here.
The only one who doesn't make it is Stanley, who kills himself not long after Mike calls him. Not everyone is into it at first, but once Beverly reveals that she's experienced visions of their deaths, which will come to pass if they don't fulfill the oath, they all decide to stay and finish what they started. How will they defeat the monster once and for all? Thanks to Mike's exhaustive research, they know that a Native American ritual known as the Ritual of Chüd is the only way. Basically, they have to collect some meaningful artifacts from their past and use them to enter into a battle of wills with the monster that more or less transcends the physical realm. While they all go off on their own to find their artifacts, the monster doesn't waste any time trying to scare them like it did back in the good old days. It appears as a tall, ghastly old woman when Bev goes back to her childhood home to snag the love poem Ben wrote for her. For Richie, it appears as Pennywise while he's looking for a game token from the arcade he used to go to. For Ben, it also appears as Pennywise when he goes back to the school where Beverly signed his yearbook. For Eddie, it once again appears as the leper when he goes back to the pharmacy to get his old inhaler. For Bill, it appears as Georgie and a whole bunch of dead kids when he goes back to the storm drain to get the paper boat he made for his little brother. It also appears as Pennywise in a house of mirrors, where it kills a boy named Dean right in front of Bill's eyes. This devastates Bill, since it basically causes him to relive the trauma of not being able to save Georgie. Meanwhile, Bowers, who is once again sort of under the control of the monster, stabs Eddie in the face with his knife before heading to the library and attacking Mike. Luckily, Richie shows up to kill him for good just in the nick of time.
Guess you could say that was long overdue. Get it? Because we're in a library?
Everything comes to a head when the Losers Club ventures down into the cavern beneath the sewers to carry through with the Ritual of Chüd.
What a memory, son. All bad.
They find the exact spot where the monster crash landed back in the very beginning and use their artifacts to begin the process. This is when it appears in its true form, the Deadlights.
Turn light into dark. Turn light into dark. Say it! Say what? Say it!
After chanting this over and over again, it eventually descends into the ancient vessel they brought with them and they throw the lid on. Ritual complete, right? Nope. Turns out, Mike kinda lied to everyone about the effectiveness of the whole thing. Looks like the Native Americans who attempted to complete the ritual long ago actually died in the process.
They didn't believe. They didn't believe they could kill him. That's why it didn't work back then. Are you kidding me, Mike?
This is when the monster assumes its other favorite form, a giant spider, and attempts to defeat them by making them all hallucinate in various ways. While they all each find a way to snap out of it, Richie still ends up getting mesmerized. Thankfully, Eddie believes in himself enough to chuck a spear sort of thing into the monster's mouth, which causes it to freak out and fall backwards and impale itself on one of the super sharp remnants of the meteorite it traveled to Earth on. Unfortunately though, the monster is still able to return the favor and impale Eddie on one of its appendages. Before he dies, Eddie helps them remember that the monster can be defeated if they're able to show it that they don't fear it. They're able to do this, which causes the monster to drastically shrink in size and actually die this time. While this really seems final within the confines of the film, there are clues in other Stephen King works that suggest the monster might still be lurking around somewhere. And since we are still very much in an era of sequels, reboots, and rehashes, we wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if we end up seeing the trans-dimensional beast yet again further down the line. Of course, we'll definitely be seeing it in Welcome to Derry, but it's a prequel, so it only half counts, right?